Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today we're doing something a little different. Instead of tackling a topic, we're tackling an exam.
An exam?
Yeah, the Malaysian SPM English Speaking Exam.
Oh, wow. Okay, so we're going behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Getting into the nitty-gritty of how it works.
Exactly. We've got the examiner instructions right here, and
Yeah.
trust me, it's fascinating stuff. Whether you're a student, an educator, or just someone who likes to see how the sausage is made.
I'm definitely in that last category.
Well, buckle up, because understanding how spoken English is evaluated, it's surprisingly relevant to all of us. Plus, who doesn't love a little peek behind the curtain?
I like the way you think.
Yeah.
So where should our deep dive take us first?
Let's start with the structure of the exam itself. It's broken down into 3 parts, and you know me, I love a good analogy.
Oh, here we go.
So imagine it like a musical performance.
Okay, I am intrigued. Tell me more.
Part 1 is like a little interview overture, just a friendly chat that lasts about 3 to 4 minutes. It eases the student in with those classic getting to know you questions, hobbies, family, that sort of thing. Think of it as a warm-up for those speaking skills.
It is interesting that you use that word warm-up because the examiner instructions actually emphasize that. They're told to put the student at ease, create a natural conversational atmosphere.
I bet that's harder than it sounds, balancing that relaxed vibe with having to stick to the script.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's key. The instructions are clear that while examiners should be encouraging, they also have to follow the script to the letter. No deviating, no matter how tempting it might be to go off on a tangent.
Right, you can't have one student getting easier questions because they just happen to spark a fascinating conversation.
Precisely. It's all about ensuring fairness and consistency for every student.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
So what's next on our little score sheet?
Well, speaking of fairness, let's move on to part 2 of our performance, shall we? This is where things get a little more intense with the solo long turn.
Ah, yes, the spotlight.
Exactly. Each student gets a topic, a tiny bit of prep time, and then they have to speak solo for a whole minute. The examiner instructions even include sample topics.
Oh, really? Like what?
Let's see, a person you admire is one of them, which I find quite interesting.
I bet. Imagine the range of answers you'd get for that one.
Indeed. And to keep things interactive while one student is holding the floor, the other isn't just sitting there passively.
Oh, good. So they're still engaged.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They have to listen carefully because they'll need to answer a short question about their partner's topic afterward.
So even when it's a solo, there's still that element of interaction.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Which brings us to part 3, where the real teamwork comes in. This is the collaborative crescendo of our performance.
Okay, I'm genuinely curious about this one. What does a collaborative speaking task even look like?
Well, picture this. Instead of just talking to the examiner, the students actually get to talk to each other.
No way. Okay, so far so good. What happens next?
Imagine a mind map with a central question and some prompts radiating out from it.
I'm picturing it. They get this mind map, some time to brainstorm, and then what?
Then the real challenge. They have a set amount of time to actually discuss the question and try to reach a decision together.
Wait, they have to actually agree on something.
Well, they should try. But the instructions are clear. It's not about reaching the perfect solution. It's more about how they communicate and collaborate throughout the process.
Ah, so it's less about the destination and more about the journey. I like it.
Exactly. They're being assessed on their fluency, their ability to express their ideas, clearly listen to their partner, and respond appropriately. All those skills that are crucial for effective communication.
So even if they end up agreeing to disagree, that's okay.
Absolutely. What matters most is how well they navigate the discussion itself, which, if you think about it, is incredibly relevant to pretty much every aspect of life.
Okay, so we've explored the 3 parts of this performance, if we can still call it that. But now I'm curious about how do examiners actually score it all? It can't just be about speaking good English, right?
You're right on the money there. It's about much more than just grammatical accuracy. In fact, there are 2 whole sets of criteria that they use, and both are equally important.
2 sets. Okay, now I'm even more intrigued. Tell me everything.
Well, imagine it this way. The first set, the analytical scales, is kind of like looking at the individual brushstrokes of a painting.
Okay, so we're getting them up close and personal here.
Exactly. This is where examiners zoom in on grammar vocabulary, and here's the interesting part. Communicative competence.
Okay, those first 2 make sense. I mean, grammar and vocabulary, those are kind of the building blocks of language. But communicative competence, what does that even mean in this context?
It's a good question, and it's really important. Remember how we were talking about navigating that collaborative discussion in part 3?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is where that comes into play.
So it's not just about what you say, but how you say it.
Precisely. The instructions emphasize that students need to be able to handle unexpected turns in the conversation, showing they can think on their feet and respond appropriately. It's about keeping the conversation flowing, understanding different perspectives, and expressing your own ideas clearly, even when you don't have a script to follow.
Right, like in real life.
Exactly.
Because it's not always what you say, it's how you say it.
Right.
But in this case, it's kind of both.
It really is both.
Yeah.
And all of this feeds into that second set of criteria that we talked about, overall spoken performance. Think of this as stepping back to appreciate the entire painting as a whole.
Okay, so we've analyzed the brushstrokes, now we're looking at the bigger picture.
Exactly. The examiner considers the student's performance holistically, using a band score system from 1 to 6. But here's the thing. A student might have a few grammar slip-ups or use slightly less sophisticated vocabulary, but still score highly on their overall spoken performance.
Really? So how does that work? What are they looking for besides those individual language skills?
Well, it goes back to the idea of communication. Did the student understand the tasks and engage with them meaningfully? Could they handle the interview and discussion without getting flustered? Did they need a lot of guidance from the examiner, or could they keep the conversation moving on their own? It's about using language confidently and effectively in real-time communication.
So you could be a language whiz on paper, but if you clam up in a conversation, that's going to be reflected in your score.
Precisely. And on the flip side, a student might make a few minor language errors, but if they demonstrate those core communication skills, fluency, clarity, the ability to interact effectively, they can still achieve a very strong score.
That's actually really reassuring to know. It means those more intangible skills are just as important as, grammatical perfection.
Absolutely. And it makes sense when you think about it. After all, in real-life situations, we're assessed on our ability to communicate effectively, not just on our flawless grammar.
So true. Now I'm dying to hear more about those fascinating details you promised from the examiner instructions. What else caught your eye? Okay, lay it on me. What are some of those fascinating details from the examiner instructions?
One thing that stood out to me was this idea of lifted language.
Lifted language, what is that? Like plagiarism, but for speaking?
It's not quite plagiarism, but it's close. It's when students basically just parrot phrases directly from the task instructions instead of using their own words. And the guidelines are very clear that this is a big no-no.
So if the prompt asks about a person you admire and the student starts with, "A person I admire is," that would be flagged.
Exactly. It shows a lack of independent thought and creativity in using language. Remember, this exam isn't just about demonstrating that you know the right words, but that you can use them confidently and flexibly in different contexts.
It's like the difference between reading a recipe and actually knowing how to cook.
Right.
Just following instructions without understanding the why behind them only gets you so far.
Well, the perfect analogy. And speaking of things that can only get you so far, the examiner instructions also emphasize the importance of timing, which I found really interesting.
Oh, right, because we talked about each part having a specific time limit.
Exactly. But it's even more granular than that. Each response has a time limit, and they're strict about it.
Wow, talk about pressure. But I can see why it's necessary. It keeps things fair and ensures that every student has an equal opportunity to shine. Or, at least demonstrate their spoken English prowess.
Indeed. No extra time for charming accents or particularly engaging anecdotes. Speaking of fairness, remember that missing marks checklist we chuckled about earlier?
Oh, right. The one where the examiners practically have to shout out their scores to double-check each other's work?
Precisely. It might seem a bit over the top, but that level of rigor highlights how seriously they take accuracy and fairness when it comes to these exams.
Right, because these scores have real-world implications for students, so those examiners are on their A game.
Exactly. And it's a good reminder that while we've been having fun with this behind the scenes, peak standardized language proficiency tests, like the SPM Speaking Exam, are designed with a very specific purpose.
Which is ultimately to evaluate a person's ability to communicate effectively in spoken English. And what we've learned is it's not just about grammar and vocabulary. It's about so much more than that. It's about fluency, adaptability, and yes, even that communicative competence we talked about.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
Yeah.
It's about confidently navigating real-world situations where spoken English is required.
Yeah.
And that, my friend, is a skill set that will serve you well no matter where life takes you.
Absolutely. So whether you're facing the SPM, brushing up on your English skills, or just fascinated by the intricacies of language assessment, we hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
It's been a pleasure joining you for this deep dive.
And to our listeners out there, thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep those conversations flowing, stay curious, and we'll catch you on the flip side for another deep dive.